Okay, tonight I'm joined by Max Vaughan from White Peak. Hello, Max. Thanks very much for joining me.
Hi, Rich. Yeah, pleased to be here.
Fantastic. Well, there's been a lot that's been discussed about you guys, about White Peak. You're causing a bit of a stir amongst whisky communities online, and especially those interested in English whisky, and some of the feedback that I heard from the English Whisky Festival recently. But before we go into all that, maybe you could tell me a little bit about yourself and how White Peak came about and where you're at now.
Yeah, sure. I'm a kind of, I'm a lifelong, well, certainly an adult lifelong whiskey fan. And not in the sense that I necessarily had any real encyclopedic knowledge. I just like whiskey. I kind of love the romance of the way it's made, and I guess the fact that you're putting down some spirit that could conceivably be enjoyed post your own lifetime, and 10, 20, 30 years later. And I've always kind of, for me, that's always had some sort of attraction. And the sense in which to make good whiskey that someone might be enjoying, who's never going to get an opportunity to speak to the distiller or the founder of a distillery. I think there's a sense in which you really got to put your heart and soul into it. So I've always loved the whiskey industry and just enjoyed whiskey, I guess, socially. And then about 10 years ago, I kind of heard the story of a guy that was setting up a whiskey distillery in Battersea, actually, at the time, in London. He was involved with the Scotch Malt Whisky Society, which is where I used to get my whiskey from. And I just heard the story about, and the guy's name is Darren Rook, and I heard the story about what he was setting out to achieve. And it was just one of those kind of moments, certainly in my life, when I just went home that evening, and I just thought, that's what I'd love to do. I just moved back to Derbyshire, where I grew up, and immediately I sort of Googled and discovered there'd never been a whiskey distillery in Derbyshire in the Peak District, and it just increasingly then just kind of piqued my interest, and really it probably took 4 or 5 years of this kind of dream gradually growing inside me and trying to put together the semblance of a business plan, because I'm not from a drinks or spirits background, so I really didn't know where to start. Anyway, kind of wind forward the clock to 2016, I just got to a point in my life where I thought, I need to get on with this, because it's kind of, it's something that has just been there in the background for a few years now. And it was to some extent, it was a pretty kind of intimidating venture to get on with, because I didn't really have any insights. But by the same tone, I was more fearful that I'd get to sort of 70 years old and look back and think, do you know what? I wish I'd given that a go. So that was pretty much my story, how it came to pass. And, I guess some people might call it reckless. For me, it was a dream. I'm a fairly kind of rational guy. So I just decided to try and break things down into bite-sized pieces, to acknowledge where I had some weaknesses and get people on board to give me some advice, to fill in those gaps, and there were a lot of them. And I think it's like any of these, journeys in life, is that if you knew at the absolute outset exactly how difficult it was going to be, and how much you were going to have to learn, it would probably be so overwhelming you'd never start. But of course, once you start the journey, you put one foot in front of the other. And there's been, a whole heap of challenges, but, we've overcome so much now that we look back and it just seems like, that was an issue at the time, but we found a way around it. And by April 2018, all of this kind of these years of dreams and planning became a reality.
Fantastic. And how did you go about sort of assembling a team? Because you mentioned there that you don't have much sort of distilling background. So how did you go about finding a distiller and a team to help implement your plans and your ideas for the distillery?
Yeah, so I don't have any background at all in distilling. I'd been to see a number of whiskey distilleries, so in terms of the basics, I had an understanding, but frankly, left to my own devices, I don't think we'd be making great whiskey. So I basically approached Heriot-Watt University. They still have a degree program in brewing and distilling. And I'd read a few articles about some of their alumni that are, now at various distilleries around the world. And Heriot-Watt was always the institution that cropped up in terms of studying that subject. So I approached a lady called Dr. Annie Hill, and I told her what my plans were to set up a whiskey distillery in the Peak District. And could she help me find a head distiller? And she said to me, look, Max, you're not going to struggle to find someone who wants to distill whiskey in England, because the opportunities are few and far between. As long as they've got comfort that your plan is credible, then I can easily help you find someone. But actually, that kind of broader search never quite got underway, because she did say to me that she had a student from a few years back who was living down south, as she referred to it at, he was actually living in the Cotswolds at the time. And she said, look, Sean was one of my best students. He's from the Peak District area. I'm pretty sure if I contacted him and tell him what you're planning to do, that, he'd be interested. And he comes with my kind of highest recommendation. And that was really how I found our head distiller, a guy called Sean Smith, who at the time was working at the Cotswolds Distillery. So he was, I think, one of their earliest employees. He joined around the time that they commissioned their distillery. And certainly, I think for the first 2 years of their operations, Sean was one of the key members of the distilling team. And the way it came about him deciding to come and work for me, it wasn't as if I kind of approached him and poached him from the Cotswolds. It was purely because of this intermediary at Heriot-Watt University, and she spoke to Sean. He was really interested in what I was planning to do, came up to see me a few times, and that's how I found Sean.
Fantastic. With that, with that kind of background from the Cotswolds, that must be, so valuable to yourselves. That because where they're at the moment, they're obviously in supermarkets and they're doing so well. So having that background is a huge bonus to you guys. When you were coming up with the plans for the distillery, did you have any distilleries, like you said that you've been a lifelong whiskey fan, or an adult lifelong whiskey fan? Did you have any distilleries that you'd visited, or favourite whiskies that you thought, well, when I have my distillery, I want to not copy, but I want to use them as inspiration for the kind of whiskey I want to produce in the future?
Yeah, I think I didn't really have any whiskey per se that I wanted to try and emulate, but certainly when in the early stages of my kind of the plan and the dream, etc., the new wave of English whiskey distilleries really hadn't got going, and so it was very much about the old guard and the Scottish distilleries, and there's a real sweet spot in my heart for Bruichladdich Distillery. I love the island. I think one of the things I like about Bruichladdich, it's got this kind of almost phoenix from the flames type history in the last 20 years. Basically it was almost kind of hung out to dry by larger owners back in the day, and then it was kind of revitalized, and so I've always had a sweet spot for Bruichladdich. The place, just there's something about the distillery and the sort of the age of their equipment, which again, it kind of speaks to this sense of of heritage and just the sort of making things over a long term, for the very long term. So Bruichladdich is a distillery I've always enjoyed, and one of our stills has got it's got some similarity in terms of shape But that's more of a kind of it's more of a visual kind of thing rather than anything particularly scientific. And certainly our spirit is very different to Bruichladdich.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned Bruichladdich. I mean, I'm a big Islay fan as well, and also I'm a big fan of Bunnahabhain. Actually, and there's similarities there where distilleries that have kind of either been mothballed or closed, and they, as you say, a phoenix, from the flames. And so I'm a big fan of Bruichladdich as well. And that brings on to a very interesting thing with your whiskies. Now, a lot of English whiskey distilleries, I've noticed they've gone for unpeated malt to start with, but as I understand it, most of your malt is lightly peated. So there's a different approach right from the start. And is that mainly down to your kind of influence from Bruichladdich or Islay whiskies, or was it something that you wanted to do to be slightly different from the others, or just the kind of with your head distiller, the kind of whiskey that you wanted to make just happened to be peated malt?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of all those things, Rich. We did look at what the other English distilleries, certainly at the time when we were getting going, were doing. Obviously, there was a few that were still in their startup phase, so it wasn't kind of necessarily 100% clear exactly what everyone was doing. But yeah, we weren't aware of anyone else in the English whiskey sector that was doing a peated whiskey, and then during the course of a sort of 18-month or almost period where we were doing our trials and our research into what was going to be different about this whiskey we were making in Derbyshire, we started experimenting with different levels of peated malt, in our kind of in our grist, and we just found that lightly peated sort of end of the spectrum gave some, for us, and this is just a totally kind of purist, selfish decision by Sean and I. It gave us some interesting flavour complexity in the background that we really liked. So it wasn't that we wanted to be identified as a peated whiskey. It was more of us focusing on how we're going to create some interesting flavour and something that's different. And that's one of the things that we landed on. So that's it's a combination of things, but certainly trying to identify some flavors that were going to be unique to our spirit was a key consideration.
And I noticed on your website as well, because sadly at the moment I haven't been to your distillery. I haven't had the chance or the opportunity with everything that's going on this year, but I hope to put that right very soon once we're out of this next new lockdown. But on your website, there's a video of your stills arriving, and that's one thing I forgot to ask you at the start. Actually, what stills do you use? Because for an English whiskey distillery, they look like pretty, fairly large stills that you've got there.
Yeah, I mean, I guess on the English whiskey scene, most of the distilleries are small by Scottish standards. The largest that I'm aware of, I think, is the Lakes Distillery, and they've got a 5,000 litre wash still, as I understand. So we've got a 3,000 litre wash still. We've got a 2,100 litre spirit still. So kind of, I guess, in terms of capacity, similar to places like the Cotswolds. And those stills were handmade to our design. So Sean and I designed those. I had some, I mean, this is a long story, but when I was going through my kind of very early research phases, I went and spent some time in North America, particularly in Texas, and I went to live with a guy called Chip Tate for a while. And he's a real maverick, but he was also a pioneer of the American craft distilling scene. And I learned an enormous amount from Chip. And actually, I came back from my time with Chip, and that's when I made the final decision I was going to give this a go. Anyway, Chip and I discussed things like still design a lot when I was in Texas. So I brought some of that to bear as well. So we designed the stills ourselves, and we had them made by Macmillan coppersmiths, which are in a place called Preston Pans, just to the east of Edinburgh. So they're one of the few traditional Scottish coppersmiths that are left around. And yeah, the video you're talking about, that was an amazing feeling. I think on the video it features my wife and I. Claire's my wife, and she runs a business full time with me. Yeah, and those stills arriving, I just can't tell you what that felt like, because there's never been whiskey made in this region before. And so, some stills arriving in Derbyshire in the Peak District was a pretty novel day.
Big moment. And there's one thing about that where you've got, as I say, not compared to Scottish distilleries, but within the English whiskey industry, you've got some fairly decent sized stills, and it's something that I was talking to Billy Abbott from the Whisky Exchange about a couple of days ago. That as English whiskey is getting more and more interest, and people are buying English whiskey, and it looks set to continue that way. It's growing and growing. With the distilleries that have got slightly larger stills, you're going to be in the position to keep up with some of the demand, where some of the smaller craft distilleries, might be victims of their own success, that they won't have the capacity to be able to sort of produce. So perhaps that's going to be one great thing for you guys. Yeah,
I mean, and look, obviously, Rich, we're planning for success. We're not looking to take over the world. We want to kind of, I guess, retain that, almost startup mentality, keep our passion up. But certainly, one of the things that I mentioned this time I spent in Texas, I went over there with a certain view in my mind of the size of distillery I was going to build. And that was kind of based around what I could, it's kind of foreseeably finance, because I needed to raise some money, and that's always some sort of overlay whenever you're starting a whiskey distillery, unless you've got really deep pockets. But one of the things that Chip said to me was that he said, "Max, look, I think your plans are, I love some of the discussions about what's going to be different about your whiskey, but I think to do yourself justice, you want to be building a bigger distillery." He said, because he'd had the experience of starting off really small, and then it was an enormous disruption to try and upscale when he did enjoy some really, really successful time very early on. So I came back from my time there, and I ended up doubling everything. And then the other great tip that I got from Chip was to plan around success in terms of distillery layout. So our distillery building, the still house itself, is about 5,500 square foot. Actually, we could probably fit our distillery quite comfortably into a space that is 2/3 of that size. But we've managed to spread everything out, and we've also managed to have spaces to put another pair of stills or 4 more washbacks. Now, some of these things, may never come to pass, but that was great advice that I got. And it essentially means that if we do enjoy success and we want to expand our production, then we've got enormous additional kind of spare capacity in the building we're in, but also the ability to sort of make the most of that without having to stop what we're currently doing. So we'll see what the future brings, but I did get some really good advice on that front early on.
Well, it sounds. This Chip guy sounds very interesting, and maybe I should interview him sometime as well. It sounds. One thing I was going to ask you about. A lot of the English distilleries out there, have, a lot of them are using Warminster maltings, and one thing that I love, and I'll talk about your sample packs in a moment, but when you send those out, you include a little sachet of grist in there, and that was one thing I picked up, which I really liked. Actually, I think it's a nice thing for distilleries to do, to understand, the malt and where it's coming from. But what was behind the decision to use crisp? Had you viewed a few maltings, or what was your decision behind going for crisp maltings?
Yeah, we went to see a couple of maltings, and I mean, really, crisp, we found they were just really, really helpful in that sort of 15 to 18 month period that I mentioned before, when we were doing our research and our trials, and we were trying different sort of, I guess, blends of peated and unpeated barley and different barley strains. And we just found them really helpful. If we wanted just a few kilograms to, to do some tiny mashes. I mean, not a few kilograms, but 25 kilograms. They were really obliging. So when it came down to a sort of long-term choice, we just felt that we'd already built up this great relationship with Crisp. And in fact, then they've been really good. It's been a great sort of customer supplier type relationship we've had with them for the last 2.5 years. So that was it was more about that. And I think, as is often the case in life, people do business with people. And the guys at Crisp that we met 3.5 years ago are still there today, and we enjoy a good relationship with them.
Fantastic. And as I was saying, now I've got one of your this used to be one of your sample packs, and as you may be able to see, my 5-year-old daughter has decorated it. She's rebranded it for you. So if you're looking for any tips for Christmas, she's put a Christmas scene up here with some elves and the Christmas tree, and it's snowing. And she drew the elf on the shelf on the back, so it's quite nice. But it doesn't usually look like this for anyone that's watching this video. But I thought one thing I was really struck by when I got your pack was it's really nicely presented, well thought out, with a lot of information in there, and that little sachet of the grist as well. Which, if you were just tasting the whiskey or the malt spirits alone, a lot of the notes that I came up with. It makes perfect sense when you get your nose in and have a little bite and the taste of that grist. So I thought that was a great thing to do. And I was going back over my notes because this was a couple of months ago that I tried your tasting pack. And hopefully my battery hasn't run out on my phone here, because I've got a terrible memory, so I always have to sort of refresh myself and see how I brought it up a moment ago. And in that pack, I think there was... Oh, sorry.
Sorry, so I was going to say, one of the things about our pack when we were putting it together, obviously we're still at a point where we don't have any whiskey yet. We're still in that sort of first 3-year journey. So we had to think a little bit differently about the pack, because we weren't going to be able to send out, 3 or 4 samples of whiskey to people. We just don't have it. So we tried to sort of make the tasting and that online experience through Zoom a lot about the whiskey making side of things, and talk to people and try and engage with people about what we're doing, rather than it necessarily being a pure focus on tasting 3 or 4 different samples of whiskey. So that was some of the thought behind the pack.
Yeah, and I thought it was a great... Oh, sorry, I got a little bit of echo on the line there. I was looking back over my notes, and I don't know... because obviously whiskey is also a very personal thing, but the thing that I picked up right from the new make spirits, and I tried the bourbon cask as well, and a red wine cask. But one thing that I really liked is all the way through, from the new make spirit right the way through to all the different casks, is there's a very distinct malty, creamy, almost like I picked up Ovaltine and chocolate notes, and it's a signature that runs through. No matter what casks you've had it in, it seems to run through, and I think that's a great skill to be able to do that. There's others I know that Bimber comes to mind, for example. They seem to have like a DNA that runs through all of their releases, and I think you guys also got a similar thing, but in a very different style, which I really liked. Out of that tasting pack, my particular favourite, I love the red wine cask. I thought that was I've even put where's it here? Oh, here we go. Beautiful red wine, all held together, that signature sweety maltiness, and cherry cola, and also. So I was really raving about that one. I thought that was beautiful, that one there. And coming on to some of the releases now, just recently, you've had you released this one, which I have a bottle of here, and obviously Prologue English single malt, because of course it's 2 years old, so not quite legally whiskey yet. And there seems to be a bit of a buzz around you guys. Obviously, you've done a lot of online tastings. The Whiskey Festival we mentioned earlier, the English Whisky Festival. So a lot of people have picked up on White Peak and get very interested in what you guys are doing, and very impressed by what they're tasting. So I think, was it about 560 bottles you had of this, and they all sold out within a few hours, which is pretty impressive.
We did. Yeah, we did, Rich. We did 560 bottles. We gave we've got a Temperance Club, which is our equivalent of a Founders Club. So we gave our members a sort of an early heads up that this release was coming, and we also gave them a sort of 2.5 day window to sort of pre-purchase. And similarly with our cask owners, so we've got a community of cask owners. We've sold 50 casks now, so we let those guys know. So probably, I can't remember the exact figures, but probably in that kind of 2.5 day period, we sold about 25% of the release. And then, yeah, I think it was Saturday lunchtime. We just put it out to our social media and made it available on the website. And by 6 o'clock on Sunday, we'd sold every other bottle. So, I mean, and it was just, it was great. It was very kind of, it was very humbling, in all honesty. We've tried to engage with, people who are interested in what we're doing and the English whiskey scene in general. And we've tried to be as transparent as possible about our approach to whiskey making, and letting people kind of inside. And it seems that there's we're getting a sort of a growing following of people, and it was just very, very humbling and very kind of it was just a great feeling for the whole team here, just to see the interest in in our single malt spirit. And I think we decided to do that bottling because we got a lot of good feedback from people, and we just thought, we think this tastes good. We're not putting this out there because we might get a bit of early cash flow. We just thought this is a spirit that we're proud of, and even though there is there's a kind of a 3-year line in terms of age before you can call it whiskey, and that's there for kind of legacy reasons. That didn't kind of damp our enthusiasm for trying to put something out there so that people could buy it. And we and it ended up being a great success for us, and hopefully people that have bought it will enjoy it. I'm sure there's a few bottles out there that haven't been opened yet, but we'd really like people to drink it.
Yeah, well, this is one of them, but rest assured, the only reason it's not open yet is because I want to do a nice review on it, and I'm hoping to do now. I was going to do a live one with some people, but it's going to have to be a Zoom one, so I'm going to have to portion it up and send out some samples to people so we can do a live tasting at some point. So that will be a future video for me as well. Talking about videos, when you guys took part in the English Whisky Festival that happened a few weeks back, and I was involved, and I was helping sort of moderate some of the comments. Although, I was supposed to, but some of the other guys were doing such a great job that I was just kind of sitting back and enjoying the presentations and the discussions. But I did see, as people were tasting White Peak, there was a lot of very positive comments popping up, and people, who are these White Peak guys? Oh, this is great. I'm loving this. So that must have been a great feeling when you see that kind of thing on chats and know that the hard work that you've put in is paying off. In fact, after that session, and I mentioned this to you earlier, some guys from my whiskey club sent me a message, and they were like, "Oh, okay, how do we get in on this White Peak? We need some casks of this." So it's so there's whatever you guys are doing, you're doing it very well. And there's a bit of a buzz building up. You mentioned the Temperance Club, and that was one question I had for you actually, which is, it sounds like an unusual name, because obviously temperance you usually associate with people not drinking alcohol. So where did the name the Temperance Club come from?
Yeah, I mean, part of it's kind of my slightly alternative sense of humor, but I guess when we first launched the club, which was back in December 2018, there was certainly a sense at that time that our members, they weren't necessarily going to have to abstain, but they were going to have to wait, because the first bottle was going to be at least a year away. And so there was more of that kind of sense that we're going to do a members bottling every year, and hopefully people are going to enjoy that journey with us for, in some cases, a decade. But it's almost like there's this kind of sense of anticipation. Even after we released our first bottle, people still have to wait another 12 months before they get the next one. So I guess a little bit of kind of irony around the use of that word. But it's been a great thing for us. I think again, it's sort of not something we're looking to have on a kind of mass scale. I think we've got less than 30 memberships available now. We're going to cap it off at 200, certainly our 10-year membership. And the reason for that, for me, is very, very simple, is that we have quite a significant local following, but notwithstanding that, if ever we put on an event, and we're going to be doing events at least once a year for our Temperance Club members, notwithstanding COVID, and we always allow members to bring a guest. So I'd never want to be in a position where we couldn't potentially have all of our membership turn up with their guest. I'd never want to be in a position where I'm having to say to people, guys, I'm really sorry, but some of you can't come this year because we can't accommodate 3,000 people. So it's a number that we'd like to think we'll be able to always offer a really good service to, and also be able to sort of welcome the whole group down to an event if that ever comes to pass. And they're a small group, but hopefully a group of ambassadors that are they're truly following our journey, because they've had our 12-month age spirit, they've had our 24-month age spirit. Hopefully a few of them have bought this Prologue release, so they've really kind of experienced the early days with the distillery.
Right, and so of course this has given us certainly a clue as to when your stocks are going to be ready to be legal whiskey. So this one is 2 years old, so obviously I'm guessing we're another year away from your first big launch. How are you going to approach that? Are you going to release a whiskey that's going to be 3 years old, or are you going to only release when you're 100% happy with it? Is there any kind of rush to release the first one, or could it be 4 years, or have you kind of set yourself, okay, as soon as we've got whiskey, we're going to get some out there?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right, Rich. We're not going to put anything out there unless we're happy with it. And certainly with the Prologue, again, we were happy with it. So, irrespective of the age, it was something that we felt very comfortable, putting out there and, allowing people to taste. And I think on the basis of, our understanding of our spirit now, we feel pretty confident that we are going to put out a 3-year malt. And so, the plan is in a year's time to do our first release. I think it goes without saying we'd never put anything out unless we were comfortable with it. But I think all the indications we're getting at the moment, certainly, some of the casks are more active than others, and what's in that Prologue release is our STR X wine cask. And it's very likely that those cask styles will form, a significant part of our early releases. But yeah, we are pretty confident we're going to be comfortable putting out our first whiskey in about a year's time.
Fantastic. And one last thing before we wrap up, because I know you have to head off. So what's the immediate plans for you guys now until that release? What have you got? I know things have of course been thrown up in the air again with all the COVID and the lockdown and that kind of thing. So for the next year or so, for the next few months, certainly, are you going to be focusing more on online tastings and getting some of your sample packs out to people and doing more virtual events over the next few months?
Yeah, I think absolutely. We'll try and continue doing some of those things that we've done ourselves. Directly with with the kind of whiskey fans, and the great thing about those online events, as we're all learning now, is that actually it breaks down some geographical barriers that are you know, they're very much there for trying to get people down to the distillery. So, you know, we've seen our packs go out to France, to Germany, to Norway, to Denmark, to Belgium. And so we've been able to engage with people on a much, you know, broader geographical basis. So yeah, absolutely, we're going to carry on doing some of those things. And you know, my expectation for next year is a number of the whiskey festivals are probably going to be planning around hosting them online again. So yeah, we're going to try and get ourselves involved in you know, in some of those festivals. We've got to, you know, we've got to sort of I think to some extent be selective, because it's not like we have you know, 4 or 5 or 6 you know, releases that we can send samples out to people. We're not in that position. So you know, we will be going with those kind of festivals that I guess give us the right kind of platform for the, you know, the sort of the stage of the business.
Absolutely. Well, one thing that I'll certainly be planning over the next few months, or as soon as I possibly can, once things are safe and everything's sort of hoping to open again, is I'll have to come down and see you guys, and maybe I can make a video, a bit of a tour around the distillery if that's possible in the future. So I'd love to come down and meet you guys in person and see exactly what you're getting up to down there.
Yeah, well, Rich, I mean, you'd be very welcome, and yeah, with or without video, either's fine. And you know, hopefully it won't be too long before we can kind of yeah, fulfill those kind of yeah, those kind of ideas.
Fantastic. Well, Max, thank you so much for joining me this evening. I really appreciate your time, and I know you've got a family to get back to, so thank you very much for the time, and yeah, I shall catch up with you very soon.